I promise in the next 45 minutes is that I'm going to be authentic and share with you why it's so important for each of us as Asians to come together and discuss how to overcome the generational traumas that many of us know and feel and experience, but don't have the vocabulary for, and continue to suffer silently alone as individuals. And we're passing it on to our children. Many of you know that I have children who are now 26, 24, 19, and 16, and I did not want to pass this on to them. I gritted my teeth and said, no way am I going to pass this on to them. And guess what? I passed it on. But there's ways to undo some of what's already been done. There are ways that we can show up as a community, as individuals that can stop the trauma. What am I talking about? I'm talking about the overwork, the stress, the constant comparison. And when I went into work as the founder of Bamboo Myth, I discovered even more deeply what exactly is the root cause of these behaviors that keep us all working so hard, that keep us all striving and actually succeeding, looking great, being called the model minority. And yet internally, many of us have wounds that we don't talk about, that many of us don't even admit to ourselves, that keep us feeling empty, that keep us feeling lonely. We're too embarrassed and too ashamed and trained from our Asian culture to not air our dirty laundry, to only show our good side on LinkedIn and says, I'm honored to have been invited to 16 talks, and I'm honored this and I'm honored that, and oh, I got promoted. That's the side that we all know and want to share, but the side that is hurting, the side that doesn't get airtime. I believe there is a catalyst in being able to share those parts of us that's going to finally lead to us, this generation, overcoming generational trauma and letting our next generation of children have much more success in overcoming these internal ceilings. What are these internal ceilings that I'm talking about that are even more important than just the bamboo ceiling, that are part of a larger problem that's not just about individuals, but an entire culture of people? I'll tell you what my individual ceilings have been that I had to overcome. And what I'm calling a ceiling is a belief that results in a behavior that causes self-sabotaging, that causes anxiety, that causes us to be a smaller version of ourselves. And it really is unnecessary suffering. One of the first ceilings I had was I was told that I was supposed to be a boy and his name was going to be Yi Cong. So I had a belief that I am not wanted. I am not the child my parents wanted. And because of that, the mistakes I made in trying to overcome this belief was I worked extra hard in everything. I became a people pleaser at a very young age, and I didn't want to disappoint them anymore. So I said yes to all kinds of things, like becoming pre-med, doing piano lessons, not going to parties. One of the early times I remember, another ceiling that formed was I liked people. I wanted friends. And early on, I was probably in the first grade after school, instead of going straight home, I went to my friend Betty's house, and what she was doing was taking dandelions from the lawn. This was before iPad days. I took dandelions from the lawn, and we were, by our hands, making little cuts and slits, and you put them in water and the dandelions curl. And it was so much fun. I stayed there for probably an hour. Then I walked across the street back home to my house. I was met with anxiety, anger, fierce disappointment. And I decided that day, no more friends for me. I'd rather not disappoint my mom than to ever do that again. And I don't remember being very good at making friendships from that point on. So one of my ceilings was, you don't disappoint family and you do what they want. And so instead of being who Jeannie is, I started to be who other people wanted me to be. And I'm not allowed to disappoint you. Another ceiling I had was people's opinions of me. If you didn't like me or said something negative about me, it impacted me so greatly. It made me feel so bad. Part of it might have been because I was the only Asian in an all-white school. And when they said my name and couldn't pronounce Hwang and everybody laughed, it just felt terrible. When I was the only kid with black eyes, which I thought were black hair, and I stood out again, didn't want to stand out. So one of my ceilings was standing out means that you're different and people laugh at you. So I never wanted to stand out again. As I got older, another one of my ceilings was I have to do everything perfectly, because when I got B's, I got in trouble and I was punished. in various ways, had to quit activities I enjoyed. And so perfectionism was another one of my ceilings. Because of all this, my new ceilings that formed were anxiety, depression, constant worry, and pressure. These were my continual ceilings through most of my life. I've been able to overcome so many of these. Especially with the help of getting stage 2 breast cancer. I decided to live after that. I wasn't going to let the first 40 years of my life be the way that I was going to live the next 5 or 10 or however much longer I had. I decided to buy a piano, take voice lessons. I learned to draw, even though I felt I was a terrible drawer. I started to take risks because I didn't care anymore what you thought. I lost my hair, lost part of my body. At this rate, I'm just going to live for me. And it was the change of me becoming Jeannie version 2.0 because I was starting to break these internal ceilings I had of thinking I'm not good enough. I shouldn't try anything I'm not good at. I don't want to look stupid. I don't want to feel bad. And because of that, Bamboo Myth started, and I am now singing in a rock band. I sing in a jazz band. I do all kinds of fun things for myself. I've raised rabbits. I've raised chickens during COVID. I had a cockatoo who could speak. I've done hang gliding. I take hip hop classes, and I'm the oldest person there, and I don't care that I'm not as agile and I can't learn things fast. I tried out for America's Got Talent. I am starting to live my best life, and my kids noticed because prior to all this, I never went to the beach, even though I live in California and I'm an hour away. Remember the story about not playing Uno very much? I started to play. I'd go to karaoke. I'd hang out with my kids. We'd play all kinds of games, and they noticed. And one of my kids said, "Mom, what happened? You're happy." That's saying a lot when it comes from your kids because you can't lie to them. You can't fake it with them for 24/7. And so I knew that I became a much different person who was able to slow down, who was able to live life. And I knew I was afraid of failure, but I didn't know until recently I was also afraid of success. And this is the current ceiling that I'm asking you to support me in so that I can bring my new experience and create a new program for those of us who are getting out of our comfort zone, who are doing big things in life. We're no longer playing small and are hit with yet another ceiling. I'm going to show people how to overcome that and say, hey, it's worth it. Let's do it together. Wouldn't it be great if each of us got to do what we really wanted, not what we should, and we were no longer influenced by fears and guilt and of being called irresponsible or lazy? What a different world that would be. If you look in leadership training courses, all kinds of advice, articles, different workshops and podcasts, a lot of the training teaches us to modify behavior. If you didn't get promoted, take more classes. If you didn't have the visibility, go and find a mentor or a sponsor. If you don't have enough opportunities, network. Those were all behavioral changes. And yet as an Asian American, I know how hard it is to change my behavior. I can't even say I'll go to the gym and get to the gym. How am I going to do these bigger, scarier things, right? So behavioral changes are never the answer or the solution. There is a further source, a deeper reason why your behaviors aren't changing and you behave the way you do. And in the line of work I've made so many discoveries, and I'm finally ready to share with you. I've discovered that the belief system that we have as little children, especially as Asians, comes in the form of comparison, criticism, don't disappoint mom. Many of us who are girls, we were taught and told at a young age we wanted a boy. And so we come to earth with this feeling of already being not enough. And so for many of us, the number one real source of a lot of our angst, our stress, why we overwork, why we are workaholics, why we focus on things that don't even matter and putting all our energy into work and not valuing ourselves, valuing self-care, valuing our family, spending time with our families. And again, I'm preaching to myself first and foremost. Let me give you an example. My first 2 children, I was a stay-at-home mom. And yet even so, I was supposedly having all this free time. I forced myself to do the chores first. And I told my children, I have to be responsible. Right? If I'm not responsible and do all the dishes, all the diapers, clean everything, I don't have time to play Uno with you. And do you know how many times I played Uno with my 2 older kids? Probably 10. 10 from the time they were 8 until they graduated. And I regret that every day. I try not to shame myself, but I regret that going, why? Uno is a 10-minute game. How many of you feel that way in your lives where there's something you've wanted to do that doesn't take much time, but for some reason you can't get to it? And it's from a feeling of, I haven't done enough. I'm not enough. I need to be responsible first before I can take care of this thing for myself. Which brings me to the next belief that many of my clients voted on yesterday on why we have such a difficult time and have so much stress, even as we succeed and accomplish so much. And that second belief is this: I don't have time for myself. Many of you who are Japanese were taught as young children to always focus on others, right? Be really empathetic. And that is a strength. There are so many wonderful things about that culture. And yet, when I get Japanese Americans in my class, they have the hardest time learning to take care of themselves and turning to themselves and doing something nice for themselves. Because again, this cultural conditioning happened at a very young age. I wish we could ignore these things, but in my work, in the 7 years of coaching over hundreds and hundreds of students, what I have seen is whenever we talk about the source of the guilt, the source of the people pleasing, the source of the workaholism, it's always something that happened when they were very young. Most of them say, for as long as I can remember, when I was 3. Let me share some of these stories. And my goal is not to get your pity, but to help you realize and remember you have also experienced this. And could this be the roadblock that's keeping you from more joy and success and freely, authentically being you? I'm going to keep this anonymous, as many of us don't want to publicly come out with our story, because as Asians, we have a sense of shame, right? Of not sharing these things. But I will tell you over and over again, not just one or two clients, but many have told me their parents straight out told them, you are dumb. Can you imagine that? You are dumb. Of course, you're gonna grow up feeling that sense of needing to prove yourself. Many of them were shamed by an older brother or sister who said, "Oh, don't you know this?" when they asked for help on a physics problem. Over and over again, I've heard this. And again, that creates a sense of I am not enough. Many of us got compared to or were the kid that was the comparison. And both of those situations create pain. Because I'll tell you what happened to me. I was the best in my class, and that was not happy. I was the source of jokes, of jealousy, of bullying. And one of the most painful things that happened to me in high school, one of my best friends said at our graduation, "You beat me," because I was a valedictorian. And I didn't want that kind of comparison to influence and infiltrate my personal relationship. She was Asian American too, and her parents always talked about me. And so this whole idea of comparison, of not being enough, has contaminated the things that matter to us. I will dare say, I know many of us, even with our own spouses, our partners, people that we love, our own family members, get jealous of us. I've been told by many Asian coaches, "Oh, I was supposed to be Asian Oprah." There's this sense of shame because we are so geared toward comparing ourselves to each other. And the result is always the same. I am not enough. Until you know and admit that you have this somewhere in your life that's causing you to not be your authentic self. And until you know how to fix this, you will continually experience stress in the form of guilt, overworking, overcommitting, doing too much. And again, we're called the model minority for that, but really it's a coping mechanism, right? For this feeling of anxiety, of fear that if I stop working, if I relax, I will be lazy. I will not be living up to my potential. Many grown-up adults like me, 40% of us, according to surveys I've done, still feel the need to not disappoint our grown parents who are in their 80s and 90s. And so these beliefs from childhood continue to affect us. Why does this matter? Because if you can't feel for yourself and you've given in and said, this is just the way I am, can we talk about the next generation for a little bit? I have 4 children, and they've mostly all finished high school. We chose a high school that we thought was not very competitive because my college roommate from Stanford went to Lynbrook, if you know, and that is a very competitive high school. We also didn't want to go to Monte Vista for the same reason, so we picked Homestead High School. And when my second child was there, I was devastated one day when I got a phone call from the school principal. And I can still remember this. I was at my startup, and he said, "I'm so sorry, but one of your son's best friend passed away last night, and his group of friends have been crying in the school office for 2 hours." And I thought, oh no, it's happened again. Another Asian boy, another Asian American boy in the Silicon Valley area has given up. And it comes out in the news, and then it's hush hush, and we don't talk about it again. But I wanted to know, I wanted to save my children, my boys, every child from having to work this hard and feel this sense of inner not enoughness. We never came out and said what the cause was, but I'm pretty certain that's the reason. And if you look at other situations like this in the past 20 years, very often it's someone of Asian descent and it's a boy. And I think I know why. Because we are taught to be strong. We are taught to not talk about mental health. We're taught to not talk about difficulties and emotions. What are emotions, right? When we can't talk about these things, it only gets worse. And so that crushed me, and it began my journey, my own personal journey, to find out how can we help these children. I was valedictorian of a high school in Illinois in which I don't think I worked that hard. My children have worked so much harder, have had so much pressure in their Silicon Valley school that I never had, and yet it still wasn't enough. Because none of them got into Stanford. And they said to me, "Mom, you and Dad set the bar so high. You were both Stanford grads. That kind of pressure is not okay. And I don't want any of your children and children of the next generation to have to go through life working this hard and still coming up short." My first child went to Berkeley. Everybody there was depressed because the majority of them did not get into their college of their top choice. This is the best public school in the country. And they are still feeling not enough. Many of them first-time college attendees for their entire generation, their entire family. And yet that stress is there. I've worked not only with Asian Americans, I've also worked with Blacks and Hispanics, immigrants with a European background, LGBTQ folks. You know what? We have a commonality that we don't talk about. The commonality is many of us have gone through difficult childhoods in which there was poverty, in which there was high standards. And usually that's all it takes, one or the other or both, to create this sense of scarcity and fear that now follows you throughout life. And because of that, you never want to experience poverty and you never want to experience the lack of belonging. Again, you work so hard to compensate for that. And so many of us are already in a stage of life where looking at the externals, your successes, your achievements, you ought to be so proud of yourself. You ought to relax and enjoy life. But have you started doing that? Or are you just setting the bar even higher and moving to the next level? You know, the talk of the bamboo ceiling, last 15 years, I love that we want to succeed. I love that we want to all reach our potential. But unfortunately, what I've come to realize is just cracking the bamboo ceiling, getting that next promotion is not going to solve our problems. Matthew Perry, one of my favorite actors, has a clip on YouTube, and he says, you know what? Getting your dreams, getting what you want in life doesn't actually fix the internal issues. He said, I got my dream house. I got everything I wanted. It lasted 6 months. And then the old feelings came back. I wonder how many of us have experienced this silently and alone in our beds at night and tried to brush it off and not think about it, thinking that we're ungrateful. I get a lot of clients thinking, oh, I'm just ungrateful, and that's why there's an emptiness. It's not because you're ungrateful. It's because of our cultural conditioning that has created a framework within us, a subconscious or unconscious iOS, if you will, that takes over, and we are more comfortable. The Asian comfort zone is more comfortable with stress, chaos, working your butt off, giving to everybody else, putting ourselves last, being a martyr, raising the bar every time. That's the comfort zone. It is the biggest myth that our comfort zone is supposed to be comfortable. That is not comfortable. And as I did more and more of this work, I started to realize that at age 40, if our lifespans were short, like in the Middle Ages, this might be okay. But by age 40, and we all live way past age 40 nowadays, what I've noticed and heard, and what women have told me is I'm starting to get physically sick. And as I took notes and gathered the data, I know what they're going to tell me. I have IBS. I have migraines. My eczema is flaring up. I'm developing all kinds of itchy hives. I now have fainting spells. Hashimoto's. These are all autoimmune related diseases where if you are used to this level of stress and pressure in your life and it doesn't really ever let up, by the time you're 40, your body is warning you. It's saying, no, I can't do this. And that's exactly what happened to me and what caused my first transformation back in 2014. At age 39, I was diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer, and it scared the living bejesus out of me. Up until then, what was I doing? I was people pleasing. I was overdoing it. I wanted to have a title. I wanted to feel like somebody. I had achievement-oriented self-worth problems that if I wasn't doing something, if I wasn't productive, if I wasn't the best, if I was not number one, if I was not constantly doing, I felt like a loser. And I thought it was just me. And to my dismay, I realized it's not me. It is so many of us, the majority of us, have these feelings of being not enough. And our behavior is just a coping mechanism. I went to 20 years of therapy, 7 different therapists, multiple self-help books, thousands of self-help books, trying to figure out how to undo the depression and the anxiety that I have felt since I was 7 years old. I'll share with you a little bit about where that came from. And here, I'm not here to diss my family, but I know my story is a reflection and a mirror of so many of your stories. I grew up with a lot of criticism, harsh criticism around me, if not directed toward me, directed toward my family members. I was scared to make mistakes. Anytime I did something wrong, instead of forgiveness, I got a long lecture and I felt a ton of shame. At a certain age in my life, unfortunately, I witnessed domestic violence. And now here I am going home from school worried about my life, worried about the health and the livelihood of people that I love very much. And I developed massive anxiety, massive depression. I actually enjoyed going to the dentist. I enjoyed going to school because those places were safer for me than my own home. I was also an only child. And my mom was the oldest of many, many children. And she never talked about her problems. And I learned I don't talk about my problems. We would be on the driveway to one of those annual potlucks with all your Asian American friends. We'd be fighting in the car. But the minute we got to the front door and they opened it, they'd go, "Hey, Happy New Year! How's everyone doing?" And I learned to put on that face. And I took that face with me, that facade with me, to high school, to college. Did you know that I flunked out of PChem? For those of you who know me, I didn't go to med school. I flunked out of PChem. There was no way my grades were good enough. It was never something I wanted to do. I did not want to be a doctor. And there was no motivation. And I read slow. And for all these reasons, and all you amazing, brilliant people in one building, I didn't make it. And when I told my parents that, they disowned me. And I had to move out of the dorms the next week. If you remember that I disappeared, but I never told anybody. I got an F in PChem. I had a really hard time there. And that shame, that feeling of embarrassment, if you don't deal with that, it goes with you when you become a mother. It goes with you when you are the VP of a company. It just sticks with you and it creates problems for you, internal problems. One of these is the beliefs we talked about. I am not enough. I have to work harder than other people. I'm not as good as other people. And so then we have all these behaviors, coping mechanisms, right? And that's what we do see. We know, many of you know, that many of us do not speak up in high stakes meetings. Many of us have a hard time advocating for ourselves. Many of us, when we don't get promoted, our number one tool and only tool is to work harder. Because that's what we've been taught. Hard work is supposed to give you success and results. Many of us take on the job of 3 people and we don't know how to say no. Guess what? Because we were taught another belief that saying no disappoints others and we're not allowed to do that. And so we're afraid to put ourselves first. And so you will continue to take more and more work and say yes to more and more projects until you are burned out and you're worried about missing these deadlines. And now you have insomnia. You're yelling at your kids. Your marriage is falling apart because you haven't talked to them for days. And yet your priority is still work because as a little young child, you were told, don't disappoint me. Don't F it up. And so I hope you see the connection. Many of us Asians have this feeling deep down that we are not enough. If 5 billion people feel this problem cannot be you. And again, I've done so much research and over again, the results are the same. The data does not lie. Number 2 is I don't have time for myself. I don't have time to do things that I love because somehow someone else owns my life. The culture owns my life. The company owns my life. My parents own my life. Somebody else is in charge and not me. And I have to keep putting out my skills for other people to reach their dreams, to help them translate, to do their taxes, to drive them to the hospital, whatever it is. I don't really have a sense of self. That is a cultural problem. And number 3, and this is the one where the model minority myth covers it up beautifully, is that my self-worth is tied into my achievements. I believe this is the most damaging one. Not that I want us all to be lazy and mediocre. I don't believe in mediocrity. I think as people, we're the only species that loves to create, that loves to build. We like to do meaningful things. We like to solve hard problems. That's not what I'm saying, to not do and become a vegetable. But I am saying, have you thought? The journey matters. Many of us achieve great things, but the feeling, the motivation while we're doing it is fear, guilt. Don't F it up. Don't disappoint. I have to do this in order to be a good daughter. I have to do this in order to make up for my parents coming to this country and suffering so I could reach my potential. And it's from a place of fear that we're not enough and we have to keep going. We have to choose hard. We cannot relax. That motivation squeezes the joy and the fun out of those achievements, doesn't it? I've heard so many people I've coached get to the next level in their career, and instead of joy and pride in themselves, they feel more pressure because the stakes are higher. Now I really have to keep up, and it's more visible, and people will see if I fail, and I must not fail. That is the wrong order, right? When the motivation is fear, the achievements are no fun. When we have to achieve in order to validate our own worth, it's the opposite of what brings joy. It's the opposite of what brings fulfillment. It's the opposite of what brings happiness and peace and a sense of impact. And so what I teach women and anybody who wants to work with me to learn how to switch this around is the worth comes first. We must teach our children, and we must teach this through modeling this ourselves, that we are already worthy. Turning that equation around so that our worth is not dependent on achievement after achievement, the never-ending cycle of achievement after achievement. I hate to say this, but even a lot of these Asian organizations that are championing Asians, it's still based on achieving more and more, right? We need to come together and go, we are already worthy. You are approved already. And if you feel approved and you realize there's nothing wrong with you and you don't have to do this, but you get to do this, that you're already worthy. And now, from a place of self-worth and confidence, I get to go and push this movement and pass it on to the next generation. That is a feeling of freedom. I know you want internal freedom as much as you want financial freedom. And that internal freedom comes at a cost. And the cost is vulnerability. But the alternative is even worse, because my comfort zone is not talking about myself. My comfort zone is playing small, remaining in the background. Because I don't want your jealousy. I don't want your mean comments. I don't want your judgment. I don't want your sense of who the hell does she think she is. And I've had many people tell me that you ought to be doing this in a group. My comfort zone is not comfortable. It's a place of stress, of working really hard, of doing things for other people, of using my talents and skills for them. But somehow when it comes to me, I fall apart because I am used to being very small. I would love your support in terms of your individual buy-in that yes, there is freedom from generational trauma and this is the generation that can do it. I am a nobody. I'm just somebody who started to think one day, had time to think and realized our children are suffering. We are suffering, not by anything inherent that we did wrong, but because our culture puts so much pressure on us and it causes us to fear failure and it causes us to fear success, because that's why I'm here today. I finally made it after 7 years in this business. Being an entrepreneur kicks your butt. You deal with feelings of imposter syndrome. You have feelings of, I don't know what I'm doing. You fight through all that. I've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on coaches, marketing help, every area, money. I had a money coach to help me deal with scarcity. And it is hard, but it is so worth it. It is so worth it because I feel alive. This sense of realness that you see me displaying is real. I am not faking this joy, and that makes me so happy. It makes me feel real, that I'm not hiding and pretending to be somebody that I think you want to hear. But I need your help. You know that feeling you had during COVID when you had all that free time and you got to evaluate your life? And it was painful, wasn't it? Many people felt a sense of, wow, what I'm focusing on, my priorities in life, may not actually be what really matters. I know you know there is a part of your heart today that you know what really matters for yourself and for the next generation. And it has to do with the things we talked about today, getting rid of that cultural invasive feeling that we are not enough. Getting rid of that cultural invasive, debilitating feeling that I don't have time to do whatever it is that you know is your zone of genius. Getting rid of that feeling. If this has touched you, I would like you to individually participate in this renewal, in this overcoming of generational trauma with me by either attending one of the classes I'm offering yourself or sending someone in your place, a child, somebody you love, and start participating in the skill sets that are very difficult to find outside of this arena. I hope that for many of you, this has brought you hope. This has given you a way out of unnecessary stress and an amazing new hope for the future, for the next generation, that we can all be the next 2.0 versions of ourselves. And let's seize the ceilings together.